have at least gotten close to establishing our backend, what I want to do next is start on the front end. And I chose Vue.js for this. React is obviously a known contender to Vue.js. I feel like Vue might play a little better with Rails in the sense of you might not need it everywhere, but where you need it, you can add it. So with that in mind, I want to add this in basically a new app on its own though. So it's what I just said is contradictory because this is a completely different app. It's front end only. But what I'm going to do is talk to our Rails API through it. And with this, there's going to be some logic here that's at least foreign to me too. So if you feel overwhelmed and see this stuff and aren't quite sure what's going on, don't worry. I am kind of in the same ballpark. A lot of it has to do with setting up Axios and talking. Axios, I should say, is a way to do requests and responses via Ajax from a Vue app to anywhere else, maybe a server or some sort of backend. But what we need to do is hook into it and build some wrappers around it so it talks to our app the way we want it to using our refresh controller we created. With the Vue library called Vue Axios we'll use to do a lot of this logic. So at least at the very beginning, we need to make sure you have Node installed. I have 11.6 at this time. Let's check. I'm going to use Yarn as my package manager. You can see what you can use npm if you wanted to. I think by default it uses npm, but feel free to use that. So to actually install Vue, we're going to use the Vue CLI, and I'll actually take you to that web page. It has its own site as opposed to just Vue. And the CLI is nice. It actually has a way to view what you're building in a visual representation if you want. I'm not really going to use that one. I'm going to use the actual CLI. You can read the docs here. They're pretty informative. But what I want to do is just get the ball rolling. So I'll actually install using this command here, yarn global add Vue CLI. Believe I have it installed, so yours might take a little longer. I'm going to install it just within my backend app. This doesn't install a project yet. It just installs Vue CLI. So give it a second and we'll get this installed and then create an app. So basically everything is installed that I need to install. If you want to double check, you can do Vue version and I get 3.3 back. So to init a new app, you pass in, again, you can check out the docs, but what I'm going to do is init a Vue app by doing this: Vue init webpack record store. I'll just call this front, and it will go through basically a series of questions that you want to do. Global action. Oh, maybe I did that wrong. Let's add it. Global. All right, so make sure you use global. Let's hit this up. There we go. I want to do this again. Downloading template. We can call it whatever we want. I'm going to just keep it as record store front. Just hit enter. Description can be, we'll say a Vue.js front end app for a Ruby on Rails API backend app. I don't know. That's terrible. Okay, author. It's me, Dribble. I'm going to just do Andy Leverance. I'll do my web crunch email just because I have so many emails. Okay, so we can do runtime plus compiler or runtime only. I'm going to do compiler, so you can just hit enter, which will be standalone. Install Vue router. I'm going to say yes, so Y there. Use ESLint in your code. Sure. And pick an ESLint preset standard. We'll just do standard. Set up unit tests, I guess. Let's do Karma, I think. And end-to-end test. I don't really need that. I don't think. I'm not going to really do much tests. I'm going to use Yarn. And there it goes. So this is going to be created in your record store back Ruby on Rails app. So it's going to be nested within that app. Feel free to take that outside of the app and just have 2 folders you're working in. I'm just keeping it contained in one place so I have a better organized sites directory. Up to you what you want to do there. We'll install this and I'll check out the structure in a second, just so you get a view of a Vue app and its initial state. Once it's finished, it'll give you these prompts. I'm going to do record storefront. And instead of npm run dev, I'm just going to do yarn dev. And it basically deploys all these commands. So I'm on 8081. From here on out, if yours says 8080, that's okay. Remember back when we configured our cores initializer, be sure that matches at least here in your Ruby on Rails app. If it's 8080, then pass 8080 there. If not, pass whatever it says there. Or comma separate both if you have different instances of your app. On a production site, this would change to whatever your app would be. With that installed, you see in our Ruby on Rails app, we have record storefront here. And here's our structure on the left side. I think I have tree installed, so I can do... All right, so with tree installed, you can do something like this. We can ignore certain directories too. So I'll just do node modules. So then we could see this tree structure, hence the name. What is entailed in a Vue app? So here we've got Webpack. Oh man, I can't talk. We got Webpack based configuration for whatever environment you're in. Configuration around those same environments, and then the source folder, which is where you probably do most of your work, and then the static folder for testing and so forth down here too. All right, so what I want to do to start is, I've been using Tailwind a lot, and I'm going to add that as well. So I'll do yarn add Tailwind CSS and save it to dev. What we want to do to initialize Tailwind, it's on the Tailwind docs if you're not sure, but you can go to node modules, bin. We need to run a little init. There we go. Create a Tailwind config file, Tailwind.js. That's going to end up being in our main directory of the app here. This has all of the defaults ready to roll. I'm just going to leave them as is. But we need to set up our source to have a main .js. So we'll actually need to include Tailwind in that file. Just by doing this bit. So import main CSS. We need to create that file right here. Inside that, there's boilerplate code we can put in. I'm going to actually copy it from my other project. It comes straight from the actual site if you want to grab it. Did extend a few classes here to include some form related stuff. Feel free to copy this. I'm not going to go ahead and type through because it's just a lot to type, to be honest. It's kind of redundant. It's just CSS apply rules though. So with Tailwind, you can do stuff like this. It's kind of neat, but it's a post CSS kind of thing. Having said all that, I think we're clear to roll. Actually, we need to establish a post CSS config real quick. I need to point to that Tailwind config. I jumped ahead. So right here, we can add a area for Tailwind. CSS, pass in an object, and then it's actually just a path to the file. So we'll just do tailwind.js. Save that, and I think we should be good. I'm not sure what the post CSS URL is, but it's empty, so I don't think it should matter. Aside from that, I want to add a Vue Axios library. So I'm going to do yarn add Axios and Vue Axios. I'll just add those. And then I'm going to create a file. It's going to be some logic behind the scenes here that's going to end up hopefully making sense. It's kind of complicated how we're doing this, but at this point, I think I could start the server. It should already be started as far as I know. We have an ESLint problem, so let me double check, find but never use. I'm just going to comment this out for now. But we can visit localhost and should see our default Vue app just kind of doing its thing, which is what you see in the source directory and the component hello world. So this is kind of what you see. We're going to end up deleting this and just making our own components. So what I'll do first is start to hook up the logic we need behind the scenes. This is where it gets a little tricky, so fair warning. But I want to create a new folder within a folder in our source directory called backend. And inside that, I'm going to have Axios as a folder. And inside that will be its own folder, our own file called index.js. All right, and this file is going to have some basic logic that we need to get the either plain response or a secured response based on the headers that are sent through our app. We're also going to point to our actual app URL that is the API. So that's going to be localhost 3000 in this case. First, we need to import Axios. As you remember, we installed that too. Here we're going to actually include it. So that's step one. Next, we need to define our API URL. And that's actually going to be our Rails app. So, all right, so localhost 3000 is our Rails app. That would change based on whatever your Rails app is hosted on. Next, we need to do two instances that are going to be wrappers around Axios. And you can do this in such a way that assumes the content type, if there's credentials passed, and then the URL we need to pass through for our base URL. This is all in Axios documentation, but it's stuff that's honestly was over my head at first. I'm just kind of going with the flow here. So excuse my ignorance if something's off. So we'll do Axios.create. And this will be an object that you can pass through. And it's going to be a base URL will be our API URL. We'll pass through that with credentials. True. Headers. We'll set the content type to be JSON because that's what we're getting back. So application. Cool. So ES6, you don't really need semicolons. In fact, the ESLint thing will tell you to get rid of them. It's kind of funny. So let's do the plain instance in this case. So Axios instance equals Axios.create. Literally the same thing here. To do its refreshing mentality, if something's off, say we get a 401 or a cookie is expired, we'll respond with this refreshed secured Axios instance instead of the plain, which we'll pass in through later. Here we're defining that stuff though. So here's where it gets hairy. Sorry in advance if it's not clear. Instance, interceptors. Okay, so a big fat arrow returns a method. We'll create config method to uppercase. This is going to define what kind of request it is, and we'll check that. So we'll do that by saying method. I think it's not equals to options and method is not equal to get. We'll pass in config.headers. We can do a spread of the config headers, which kind of separates it into an array for us. And then we'll find this one, CSRF token. and set local storage .csrf. So again, sorry if this isn't clear, but we're returning basically this configuration, assuming the method isn't options or get requests. And if that wasn't even clear, this won't be either. So this is the secured Axios instance again, same kind of concept. Response use null is the first argument, and then errors will be the next. And we'll pass in this huge block. All right, so we can say if error.response and error.response.config and error.response status is equal to 401. Do this. So we're saying if a cookie is expired or if there's a 401 response, we are going to return a refresh request, which essentially tells Axios to post to our refresh controller on our app, our API. So essentially we're going to do that now. So return plain Axios instance dot post refresh, and you can pass in the headers. So XCRF token, local storage dot CSRF. This kind of returns the response. So then we could do then response. The fat arrow will be local storage dot CSRF equals response dot data CSRF. Local storage signed in is true. And then let retry config equals error response.config. Retry headers. Config headers x CSRF token equals local storage dot CSRF, and then return the plain instance of our Axios. All right, and then if there's errors, delete the actual session. So we'll say local storage dot CSRF, delete that. Same with the local storage that's signed in. So we're saving this to the browser in essence. And then you can say with Axios, it's nice you can pass in the location to replace. Basically just say redirect here in layman's terms. Then we can return a promise to reject error. So all that else return promise reject error. If I had to explain exactly what this means, I'd fail. So I referenced another write-up on doing such a thing with JWT sessions. It's definitely foreign to me, but this is essentially, I think, if there's a response that isn't correct, say it's a 401 or a cookie is expired, you get the refresh instance and pass in our token, which is saved in our local storage. And then if the response of the CSRF token and signed in are equal to the response, then we set these here, and then otherwise we will take the headers and just do it in a plain instance as opposed to with credentials. And then if there's errors, we just delete it altogether and replace it to go to the sign-in path, which coming up, I'll show you how routing works with Vue. And our actual root instance or / of our app will actually be the sign-in path in this app. So all that done, we still need to export these variables. So we could say secured Axios instance and plain Axios instance. That gives us availability to import it in our other file, which is our main.js. So right here. So I'm going to import both this now, and then our two variables we're going to reduce. All right, so with those now imported, I have this those variables available to us. We can use them in our Vue Axios, where we're going to use that next. So that's importing from the backend Axios folder we just created. So you see here, if that's not clear. So what we can do is say Vue use to utilize these variables. We'll say Vue use Vue Axios, and then do an object and another argument that is secured, which will be secured Axios instance, and then plain, which is plain Axios instance. We still need to register those as, I guess, components of our Vue app. So we have our new Vue instance here, which mounts to our app ID here. We'll get rid of this app logo and styles. I'll use Tailwind for our stuff. What I want to do is make sure main.js is set up. So we need to actually pass in both the secured instance and the plain instance here. And then in our app, we'll have, I think that's it. So we'll essentially we can get rid of hello world, as well as the path here for now. Your app's going to croak at this and say, wait, what are you doing? But don't worry. What I want to do is import. We've got a router. We can get rid of this. Just go ahead and save that down. And I'm going to delete the hello world component entirely. Cool. And just close that out. So in the next video, I'm going to have the initial implementation of our components come to life. We're going to actually talk about routing. So we'll define some actual routes in our Vue app here using Vue router, and hopefully go from there. So if all else goes correctly, we'll start scaffolding and seeing some actual web views after all this work. So hope you're excited. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.